Hello and welcome to Knowing Me, Knowing UKSG, a podcast exploring journeys in scholarly communications. In each episode, we hear from someone inspiring from the knowledge community and ask them to tell us about their career journey and what has motivated them along the way.
Hello and welcome to the UKSG podcast. My name is Tom and today we're joined by Paula Kennedy. Paula is the head of publishing at the University of London Press. Paula, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks, Tom. I'm really pleased to be here. Thanks for having me.
Just to get us going, please can you tell me a bit more about your career journey so far?
Yeah, so I graduated with an English degree, classic kind of publishing background, I guess. And my first job was actually in a sales role in Macmillan Distribution in the glamorous location of Basingstoke. And I was working in that role with a load of independent publishers, kind of cookery books and gardening books, and actually Guinness World Records somewhat randomly. And that was a useful way into the industry, I think. It was perhaps easier to get that kind of role than classic editorial jobs. And I didn't really know what I wanted to do at that stage. So it was kind of an interesting first job. And then a marketing role at Palgrave Macmillan, the academic publisher, came up about a year later. And I hadn't really known too much about academic publishing at that point, but I knew some people who worked there and it sounded really interesting. So I managed to get that marketing job, another kind of entry level. And that particular role involved a lot of author liaison, which I really enjoyed. So when an editorial assistant post came up on the literature and linguistics list, I moved to that one. I managed to get that one. So I basically did three different entry level jobs across sales, marketing, and editorial. Took a scenic route, but in retrospect, I think all of those roles were really valuable in kind of giving me a background, understanding when you're commissioning books, kind of thinking about the market and who's going to read them, and actually was really kind of useful first steps, I think, for me. And then really I kind of progressed in editorial. So I became editor on the literature list after a couple of years, and I was able to start a new theatre and performance studies list. And I really loved working on those subject areas and working with English and theatre academic communities. I'm still in touch with a lot of my old authors from those lists even now. And I worked on those lists for about kind of 14 years and also took on management responsibilities. So I was promoted to publisher and then became head of the UK humanities team in the scholarly division. And we grew that humanities team, which was really interesting. Worked with some great people on that team. And then I became the global head of humanities. So I managed the US and UK editorial teams working in humanities, which was great. And I really loved it. I loved that role. Um, so I ended up being at Palgrave for about 14 years, I think. And then there were lots of changes. So things were changing a bit at Palgrave and Macmillan generally. There was a big office move to London, and I was offered quite a good kind of voluntary redundancy package. So I just ended up thinking, I probably am due a new challenge at this point, and made the difficult decision to leave, which was a very difficult decision actually. But I just thought if I don't kind of leave now and try something new, then maybe I won't. So I'm pleased I did that. And the redundancy meant that I had a really lovely year off while I was pregnant with my first child, which was great. And then I was approached about a role at the Arts and Humanities Research Council about a year or so later. So ended up kind of applying for and getting that one, and headed up their creative arts and digital humanities team at the HRC, which was a really interesting move away from publishing into the funder space that I hadn't quite anticipated doing, but was really valuable, I think, to have done in retrospect. And then after the HRC, I was there for about a year and then worked with universities as a freelance consultant, helping academics do impact case studies for the REF, which was another move outside publishing, but actually lots of overlap in helping academics think about what they're trying to achieve with their research, and how to structure and communicate that. So I think my career's kind of like evolved quite organically. I would never have had this plan to work in publishing and then research funding and then kind of as a freelance consultant, but actually it's all been quite valuable and led me to my current role, which is head of publishing at the University of London Press. And I'm managing a small but brilliant team of people, and we publish predominantly open access humanities books. So I think all of these roles maybe look slightly all over the place in some ways, but actually, you know, they were all aligned in some way with supporting humanities research and academics. And I think they have really given me a lot of understanding of the pressures that academics are under and the pressures that universities are under, and to think differently about how publishers can help their authors and the disciplinary communities they work with.
Please could you tell us a bit more about your current role at the University of London Press and what you get up to in an average week?
Yeah, I mean, average week. I wish there was an average week. It really does vary quite a lot, but I enjoy that personally. So the University of London Press is part of the School of Advanced Study at the University of London, which is a national centre for advancing the humanities and receives some of its funding from Research England. So because of this, our press has a unique remit to support arts and humanities more broadly and contribute to the School of Advanced Studies mission. So we do this in lots of different ways through the books and series that we publish, which advocate for the humanities. And I think that's desperately needed actually in the current higher education context. We'll do it over the next few years by publishing experimental, innovative, enhanced ebooks that show what's possible for open access humanities books. I think that's really exciting strand of our work. We're also involved in open access funding schemes that try to show that there are more sustainable and equitable ways of publishing books away from book processing charges. And we also run a series of publishing training sessions each year, which are online and free for anyone to attend. So we have lots of different strands of our work that all kind of support the school's mission as a national centre for advancing the humanities in different ways. And I think in terms of an average week, it's quite tricky. There's different roles that you have, I think, heading up a press. There's obviously kind of your initial role where you're managing the press and its strategy and your team. So, leading on different projects and supporting my team in their work. We've particularly had lots of changes at the press over the last few years in our strategy and operations. So we have a new website, new commissioning strategy, and lots of other kind of changes we've made. But it has meant it's felt a little bit like starting a publisher from scratch, actually, which has really been fantastic to work on. Lots of work, really difficult, but the team's done brilliantly with this. And I think now we're at the kind of fun stage of commissioning really exciting projects, really interesting projects that will hopefully kind of fulfill our goal of opening up humanities research. So as part of your kind of head of publishing role, there's lots to do there, lots of meetings. And then alongside that role, I'm also part of the directorate group of the School of Advanced Study. So I'm involved in some of the strategic discussions about the school and its activity, which for me is really interesting. I haven't worked in a university before this role. And so just kind of having an insight of how universities function and different departments and parts of the school has been actually like pretty fascinating, because I think that then gives me ideas about, well, what can the press do to support this in a way that you don't get if you are kind of outside a university system, I think. And it gives you lots of opportunities to work with interesting people across the school and the university. And I think if you work for a university press, you are always quite aware of how important it is that your home university understands that the press is a visible and positive representation of them. So that takes time and effort to build awareness of what you're doing and manage those relationships internally and externally. And I think in recent years, we've seen a real growth in the number of new university presses that have emerged, where universities are seeing kind of real tangible benefits actually of bringing publishing expertise back into the university, whether that is saving money on expensive BPCs that are charged by commercial publishers by publishing those books in-house, or supporting a university's strategy and strengths through a press's books and its global reach. And then the kind of final bit of my role, I guess, as head of publishing is becoming more involved with projects and organisations that are specifically focused on open access book publishing. So University of London Press is involved with a couple of different collective funding schemes that support OA books, including the Open Book Collective and JISC's Open Access Community Framework, which are both really brilliant initiatives. So I'm finding much more of my time in the last couple of years is spent discussing ideas and activities that support the growth of non-profit OA publishing and working more directly with libraries, which has been a really lovely kind of new aspect of the role that I've really enjoyed. I think there's loads of overlap actually between what libraries and non-profit open access publishers are trying to do. And it's actually really exciting to be involved in these discussions when the publishing landscape is changing so much. So it's really varied, but I am really enjoying it. I think this role has kind of somehow managed to bring together all the different strands of my previous experience actually into one really interesting role. So I think I'm quite lucky to be in this position.
It sounds like a really varied and really interesting role. And you
Yeah.
touched on in your answer to the previous question about some of the work you do externally. I was just wondering if you could expand on whether you are part of any external groups or committees, and how being part of those groups has benefited your career.
Yes. So I guess one of the main groups that I'm involved with, I'm one of the vice chairs of the new Open Institutional Publishing Association, or OIPA, which is a horrible acronym, but let's go with it. And OIPA is a new community of practice that I was involved in developing with a number of brilliant colleagues at other university presses and Graham Stone from JISC. So when I started at the University of London Press, I hadn't worked for a university press before, hadn't worked within a university before. So I felt like I had quite a steep learning curve in figuring out how to run a press, but also how do universities work and how do university presses differ from commercial publishers. And I was really lucky that throughout my career, I'd met lots of people who now were in similar positions, and I could ask for advice and, ask random questions about how do you do this and how does this particular aspect work. Um, but without those personal contacts, it can be really difficult for someone working in publishing in a university to know who to ask for help about specific things. So when discussions first started about OIPA as a new community of practice where you could share information and guidance about all aspects of publishing and also amplify the work of university presses, that felt like a real gap where we could build something important. So I'm really enjoying being part of OIPA and helping that organisation to grow. We've got about 20 members, I think, now, including JISC. And although we only, I think we launched last year formally, but we're already really busy. We've got a skills and training program for our members being developed. We did a kind of inaugural symposium last year that was funded by UKSG, thank you. And this year we're going to have a stand and a breakout session at the UKSG conference in Brighton. So we're really excited about that. And it will be a good chance to talk about our work. So OIPA for me has become really important over the last few years. And it's really interesting being on the committee. I haven't been involved in an association in that way before or involved in governance. So that's been kind of a really interesting kind of new strand, I guess, to my work. And then other groups, I'm involved on the advisory board for the Open Book Futures project, which is funded by Research England and Arcadia. And this is the successor to COPIM, if people have heard of that. Also haven't had that kind of advisory board role before, but actually it's been really great to have insight into how this important project and its various work packages are developing. Personally, for me, COPIM and the Open Book Futures project has played such an important role, I think, for my press, but also lots of smaller open access publishers over the last few years. And I think it's really nice to be able to give something back by being involved in those kind of advisory board groups. And then I've also recently joined the Open Access Books Network Special Interest Group. So I'm involved in discussions about their work and what they could do, including kind of events on topics that might be of use for researchers and publishers. So we did one on kind of managing third-party permissions in November. That was helpful. We've got one coming up on good metadata practice, I think, in March, which will be really useful, I think. And that's, again, another kind of interesting bringing together of my work for OIPA, but also University of London Press. And then I've also been involved in things like the REF panel for English language and literature last time as an impact assessor. I think for me, that was a really interesting, insightful experience. And I think it's quite important to support our disciplines and the communities that we work with beyond publishing. So I was really happy to do that, and I would recommend that to anyone who's interested in doing it.
And going back to your current role at the University of London Press, are there any qualities that you find are particularly useful in enabling you to enact your role? And do you have any tips for anyone who would be interested in working in a similar role?
Yeah, what would I say? I think for me, definitely interest and enthusiasm for what you're doing is really important. So I'm personally very invested in what we're doing at the University of London Press. My whole career has been spent working with humanities academics and research in one way or another. And I think, particularly given the sweeping cuts we're seeing in HE at the moment, particularly for arts and humanities departments, there's a real urgency to publishing work that helps to make the case for how crucial these disciplines are for society and people's lives. So that actually really helps to motivate both me and my team, I know. I love the kind of process of publishing books and commissioning and talking to academics about new ideas, but I do think you need to have some interest probably in the books that you're publishing to kind of keep you engaged. I would also say, that I'm involved in lots of different things. So being able to juggle and organize yourself is actually really important, and figuring out what works for you. So for me, it's just thousands of post-it notes and endless reminders in my calendar, which, maybe sounds a bit scrappy, but fine, it works. But also making sure that you've got some time to step back every so often and make sure you're kind of focusing on the right things. So it can be really easy to get kind of like caught up with your inbox and the various things that are happening on email. But actually, you really do, especially as a head of a press, you need to kind of step back and make sure that everyone's focusing on the right things and that you're kind of achieving key milestones for the press. So for us, we have a press strategy day each year, which is a really good chance to kind of come together and look at the big picture and we think about kind of 3 priority areas or projects that we want to focus on for the next year. That just helps us keep focused and able to track achievements, and I find that quite helpful. And then I guess the other quality is probably just resilience, actually, and knowing how to keep yourself motivated. I think it can be quite tricky to keep motivated when changes you want to see aren't happening quickly enough, or perhaps that, discussions about open access publishing aren't going quite the direction you want at all times. But I find that if I'm feeling a bit demoralized or a bit less engaged, then just having a conversation with someone always helps me, whether that's an academic or a colleague about a possible publishing project, or maybe someone in a similar role about work they're doing. I know personally I get a lot of energy from other people, so that always kind of helps me get back on track, really. And I think collaboration, just as a general thing, is something I think is important and enjoying is really crucial, actually, to a lot of what I'm doing in my current role.
When you look back on your career so far, are there any moments that you're particularly proud of?
I would say in my kind of commissioning career, probably kind of starting up the theatre and performance studies list. That was a really fantastic opportunity for me as a young editor to just create something from scratch. And I really enjoyed the kind of challenge of that, and working with academics in a new discipline who didn't know who we were at the time. And we built such a fantastic list, actually. And I loved the process of working with academics and series editors to do that. It was a real kind of collaboration. So that particularly kind of on the commissioning side, and also kind of publishing the Royal Shakespeare Company's complete works. That was a great project, and massive, but again, a kind of rare opportunity to do something like that with interesting authors and partners. But I guess probably like my proudest achievement so far is the transformation of the University of London Press over the last few years, which has been significant. We are a relatively new team, and I think it has been a real genuine collaboration with everyone involved, which has been really satisfying and kind of motivating to work collaboratively on doing something like that. So yeah, so I think that will probably be my kind of biggest achievement. I'm just really excited now about what we're going to do over the next few years.
And finally, do you have any advice for colleagues who are newer to the sector or maybe in the earlier stages of their career?
Yeah, I would say try and be open-minded about your publishing career. So don't just necessarily think about editorial. I always say this because, obviously I took a quite quite a circuitous route to get to editorial, so don't necessarily follow me on that. But I do think actually kind of working in other departments, production, marketing, digital sales, will always offer you valuable experience, even if you do end up kind of then ending up in editorial. And you might find that you like those roles more than you thought you might, or they offer something a bit different than you're expecting. And I think once you're kind of in an organization, once you're in a publisher, then you can kind of figure out which roles look interesting and talk to lots of people about what they do and try and work out kind of where you would, find an interesting career pathway for yourself. There's also lots of new jobs appearing in publishing at the moment, with the transformations of scholarly publishing. So just be open-minded, I think, would be like kind of my initial advice. And I think for those who are particularly interested in open access publishing, maybe don't just focus on the usual players, the big publishers. There's lots of interesting work and roles being created within universities that might offer you interesting publish experience within libraries as well as kind of presses. So do kind of have a kind of broad span of what you're looking for, I think, for those kind of roles. And then I guess my final bit of advice might just be to be open to opportunities that come along. I think when I look back at all the different roles I've done, most of my kind of jobs have come about from conversations with people, whether that's friends in other departments telling me about jobs that were happening, or ex-colleagues in new publishing jobs, or even conversations with old authors, that led to work at the HRC and as a impact consultant. I've definitely been quite lucky, with the opportunities that have come my way, but I have also then taken them, I think, even if they haven't always been at the right time for me. So I think the University of London Press job as an example, I had 2 quite young kids at the time that this job emerged. I was enjoying some free, kind of commissioning part-time work alongside looking after my 2-year-old that I really loved. But then this University of London Press role came up, and I just knew it was going to be a really interesting job that had lots of potential. And so even though it wasn't perfect timing for me, I kind of went for it. And I think that's what I would say is just opportunities aren't always going to come up when you exactly want them. And so just kind of be open to that and make the most of them when they do.
Thank you very much for speaking with us today.
No worries, Tom. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
UKSG exists to connect the sector and encourage the exchange of ideas. It brings together the information community of librarians, publishers, intermediaries and technology vendors. If you know someone whose career journey would make for an interesting episode, please get in touch with UKSG via Twitter. Please like and share our podcast to help us support those in our community who are just starting their journey. And subscribe to the channel to keep up with future episodes.